So, dear colleagues, we are continuing our forum, and I'm pleased to welcome everyone who has joined our event just recently. So, I would like to remind you this is the second International Cultural Diplomacy Forum. We're going to be discussing the topics of gender equality and female voices and cultural diplomacy. My name is Iryna Prokofieva. I am the program director of Ukrainian Institute, and today with me at this stage, we're pleased to welcome Iryna Slavinska, the executive producer of Radio Culture, a translator and interpreter. And we also would like to introduce you with Agata Siwiak, the art director and curator of Close Strangers Theatre Meeting Festival, assistant professor of Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań. Unfortunately, Agata has some difficulties with connection. If no, then we will start a dialogue about our today's topic. So the topic is women's voices in the world, cultural diplomacy and gender equality. And I would like to start with a couple of theses from my side, because I had conducted a brief experiment before this panel. I have entered the search panel with words cultural diplomacy and gender equality, or the rights of women and cultural diplomacy and the rights of women and international cultural relations, and I wanted to say that I have found nothing on this topic. That brings me to the conclusion, or a hypothesis, that speaking about the international relations, international cultural relations, this topic is not widely used yet. So what I would like to believe is that our current discussion is going to give the direction to the right, give the discussion to the right direction. We can discuss the gender equality in many multiple different aspects, but we would like to now concentrate on the sector of the cultural industries and cultural diplomacy and the artistic sector as well. So, by the way, I have found a very interesting statistics that only 30% of the materials in media are currently dedicated to women, and most of that are about the advertisement or the photo pictures. It's still about how we have the stereotypized image of women in the media, because the cultural diplomacy and public democracy works with media as well, and in this case media is our constant partners in this case. But I would like to mention a couple of other factors and facts and quotes even from the research that has been conducted by the British Council in Ukraine a couple of years ago, and I've had a direct connection to this research as well. The research has been conducted in a couple of countries of Eastern Partnership and in Ukraine as well, and the research was aiming to find what was the overall gender equality issue in the cultural industry in these regions. Even though we had some statements during this research, the research was qualitative research. So first of all, they were looking for the position of the representatives of the sector of the cultural industries. So we had very interesting quotes on that people have said that there is no gender inequality in culture, that it's just the people have never faced that. That's an overwhelming statement. But when there were specific questions asked on how you're going to be reacting to some certain situation, their answers have shown that their answers are the good signs of gender inequality and gender discrimination, but they didn't understood that, and that is why they've said there's no gender discrimination in the sector. Meanwhile, the research has shown as well that our typical understanding about how women are treated in the cultural sector and how men are treated in the cultural sector, they have been approved by the answers of our respondents. Basically, a lot of people have mentioned, and I'm going to give you a couple of quotes as well, that still in the cultural sector and in the creative industries, we mostly have men in the leading positions, and the female role is being still identified as being a muse. That is a direct quote, so we had answers like that as well. And when we're speaking about the role of women in the culture and arts, it's also being said that we also have seen the comments that basically for a woman that it is a very normal sector of work. It's not a profession, it's not work at all, it's mostly like a hobby, and women can afford that. And when in the very same sector we're speaking about men, then they're having a higher position, and it is considered to be the professional role, considered to be the professional activity. So the sector is the same, but the treatment of the roles of women and men are completely different. So that's why I would like to ask you, and I would like to pose this question to Iryna, because Iryna has been working with this topic for quite a lot of years. You are the co-coordinator of the informational campaign that's called Respect, Powaga in Ukrainian. So how do you evaluate the situation with gender equality in Ukraine currently. What do you think about the equality of women's and men's rights in Ukraine? Thank you very much for this intro with this context, and thank you very much for reminding a couple of interesting researches as well. I do believe that this is already the answer to what you have been asking already. So we have to say and we have to state that in Ukraine, women are not represented, are underrepresented in multiple different sectors and in culture as well. But culture will not be the only sector in this case, unfortunately. The research that you have mentioned by the Detector Media and the Institute of Mass Information, that has already said that in different types of media, whether online or television or in printed press, women as experts, as the main protagonists of the materials, they only been in 30% of materials. And my colleagues, analytics from the Ukrainian media, they are this nice 1/3 of all of the news being processed. The same thing is about choosing the sectors where we can hear the women's voices, and I will give you the clear example. For example, the healthcare sector. Right now, under the pandemic, under the COVID-19, we know how important the healthcare is, and we know that in Ukraine we have more than 80% of women working in healthcare. But if we will consider how frequently we have the expert voices, female expert voices in the media, then you will see there's only 3 or 5%. I can't recall the direct figure. So we have this disbalance, and we have the same in culture, basically. The cultural context, in this sense, we should also consider that as a field where we have a lot of precarious work, the work that can be unsustainably paid for with no salaries at all, or the one that is connected to very low social guarantees. We know that we don't have a lot of free professionals working in the states that are not a part of any kind of big state institutions or private institutions. And of course, we can see that there is a lot of moments when the sector of the culture is treated unpopular, or we can see that the sector of culture can be treated as female sector. The same as we see the younger people in healthcare, like nurses being only provided for the women. And we can see that the same middle sector in education, when, for example, we have more women teachers than men. But, for example, if we speak about the higher management, like rectors, then mostly be in the men's positions. There was only 5% of women at those high positions. So basically, there's a lot of people who do a lot of work, but they have never become the leaders of the big institutions. Mostly the big institutions are being led and being headed by men. We have a couple of really good role models. We have women who have been visible and who have been acknowledged. We're going to speak about that as well, but the truth is truth nevertheless. We know that there are some of the artists who have been directly working with the feminist agenda that has been working in this sector. We know that we have a number of the researchers, women researchers, who have been researching the Ukrainian culture from the women's gaze. And I think we'll have Tamara Hundarova speaking on some of the next panels. She's one of the researchers who have started in the 90s, even using the feministic critique and feministic optics for Ukrainian literature as well. But unfortunately, there are just the exemptions from the rule. But I think that I will just finalize my long answer with that. But we have to understand that the times are changing. And right now, when we are talking about the gender sensitivity, and when we're speaking about the role of women in cultural sector, that's all does no longer look like a weird topic to discuss. Ukrainian society is getting used to that with the help of media, with the help of the cultural institutions, with the help of the artists, both female and male artists. We can now discuss the role of women aloud, that we can use this topic to discussion. And even if women in culture, they're not ready to identify gender discrimination, it doesn't mean that they are not being the victims of just discrimination. If they don't see those cases when they're being discriminated, it doesn't mean that they should not be protected out of that. We all need the safe space for each and every one of us. And we need to give the opportunity to protect each and everyone's rights, no matter what gender they are. Speaking about what we can do about this change, and we can go to a broader discussion, and what we can do, and how we can do the educational initiatives to that. So if we speak about that in the cultural diplomacy way, if we had our international colleagues at the British Council, Agata Institute, French institutes, or independent actors on the diplomatical fields, what is it that we can do as the representatives of this sector to be speaking loudly about this problem, and not just speak out loud about that problem, but to solve those issues in some way so that our activities would help us to resolve those problems? What would be in our power? There is a broader circles, and I would like to listen to the example, to the answers of our institutions, but I would like to start with a couple of the directions of thought that we can go to. And I'm talking about that in our legal environments as well. We have to understand that basically the gender topic, and it's not a new thing to be discussed. Ukrainian feminist tradition, it goes back to the beginnings of the 19th century. We have our mothers, the mothers of Ukrainian feminism, Lesia Ukrainka, Natalia Kubrinska, Olga Kobylyanska, Milena Kupretska. There's going to be a long list of that. But we have to understand that it is not a new thing. It's not something that has been brought up to us. That is something that has been, and it has been providing already. It's already given its fruits. It has already been given the fruits for all the institutions that work in cultural diplomacy. We can provide this legislative connection and this legacy, the connection between the artistic women from different times. That is also this, let us say, the sisterhood connections. It has lasted for 200 years already. There is a lot of things that we can be proud of. And that was, there is the combination between, the collaboration between women should be the safe place where we have the equal payment as equal salaries, where it's a safe place for any type of sexual abuse or sexual harassment, when we have the free space for the exchange between the professionals of different countries. And we need to build up this horizontal connection and in a good understanding, non-colonial approach. It's not like they are teaching us to do something, not that we are teaching them to do something, but there are some projects that can work with us all together and that can work together for improving the female voices in the art that can be directed to that. Thank you, Iryna.
You can see we already have Agata with us. Agata, can you hear us? Great. Can we hear Agata? Give us 1 second. We will double check our settings. What about now? Can you please say something? No, we still can't hear you. Okay, then maybe we will continue with the next question, and I think in a couple of minutes we will be able to hear you, and you will be able to join our conversation. So actually my question would be the next one. Iryna, firstly to you, and hopefully after Agata can speak, we can hear her reflection on that as well. Gender equality actually relates to the wider diversity topic. Yeah, it's about diversity in many senses. But what is the benefit of it? What is the benefit of diversity? What arguments can we say when advocating this topic?
I think that in Ukraine, like in other countries, gender equality issues are dealing very closely with other human rights issues. For example, just to name it, remember Crimean Tatar singer Jamala, who is a Eurovision contest winner and a prominent female singer. And of course, her songs help us to speak aloud about Russian occupation of Crimean Peninsula. And I think it's very important to have this kind of very strong female artistic activity and the possibility to speak about important human rights and politician and Crimean Tatar issues. Another example is Elena Styashkina, a writer who was forced by Russian occupation of Donbass to leave her native city Donetsk and to settle in Kiev. And her texts deal not only with the women issue in the Donbass context, for example, but also helped raise the issue of Russian war against Ukraine. The work of women as cultural managers is also very important because every one of them is helping to put human rights issues in the cultural context. and cultural issues in the human rights context. For example, I would like to mention my colleague Larisa Denisenko, who, being a lawyer and a writer, works on the borderline between culture and human rights issues. For example, Larisa's texts helps to mention this agenda like same-sex marriages, for example, or women's rights in law, or LGBT rights. And Larisa Denisenko works a lot with gender and women's rights issue, and she is especially hard working on the development of a kind of a network of gender-sensible lawyers, and she's a co-founder of an association called Eurofem. And I appreciate very much her work of gathering together representatives of different communities. And this list of names and examples would be long, but I would like to stress on a very, very important points that women's rights are human rights. It's such a simple sentence, but I think that we need to develop intersectional connections, and it will help us to build more gender-sensible culture and practices.
You started talking about specific artists, not only artists, but also artists like Jamala, and not only who are playing their role in this gender equality process. Could you please maybe go deeper into this subject, and how do you think, what is the added value of culture and art specifically in this process and in this subject? Can arts bring this added value to the process? Should we speak with arts? Can it be efficient? Speaking about gender equality through arts, and how can it look like? Maybe you have some specific examples which you think are successful, good case practice, which we should follow.
I think it is possible to joke that culture, it is a diversity itself, yeah, because culture represents a large spectrum of different practices. You cannot pretend that society is consistent only of white cisgender men, so it's important to hear different voices via culture practices. And that's why I consider that culture exchange and cultural cooperation is very important. And why? Because maybe culture can speak to all possible languages and to address all possible experiences. For me, for example, a very important experience was a film by Katarina Горностай, a Berlinale winner, Stop Zemlya, Stop Earth. I was impressed by this film dealing with teenagers' experience. And on one hand, you can compare it with a kind of TV reality show, because you can see as a routine experience of Kiev teenagers. But on the other hand, for me, it was a very interesting research about the values of Generation Z and their attitudes to gender issues and LGBT issues and dialogue between parents and kids. And I think that's why that's how culture can work. Another example of very good practices is Women in Art Award. I think it's a very interesting project co-founded by Ukrainian Institute and UN Women. And I think it's very important to make more visible, interesting role models of in the cultural field. It's important to see female artists and female cultural managers, and to see how they are developing their careers and how they are supporting other women. I think cultural diplomacy can stress on this issue, to see more women and to give them the possibility to speak aloud about their experiences.
By the way, talking about the specific art projects that work with the gender equality issue, Agata was actually supposed to tell us a little bit about her own project, which is Близькі незнайомі, Festival Близькі незнайомі, Close Strangers Theater Festival. Ukrainian Institute is happy to support it for 2 years already, and right now, these days, and yesterday started, so these days it is taking place in Poland, and they already opened mentioned one of their interactive projects, which is inclusive and safe queer place in front of the theatric venue. And this is one of the examples when we, on our behalf as the Ukrainian Institute, are trying to work with this topic through arts, through culture, but not only locally here in Ukraine, but trying to combine the efforts of artists from different countries. And I see that Agata is here, so maybe she will jump in, hopefully, if we will be able to hear her. Please, colleagues, let us know if we can hear Agata. Agata, can you try to say something?
I can hear you, and do you hear me?
Yes, finally we can hear you.
Wow, finally.
So
Great.
actually, I started telling about your project, Close Strangers, and I just mentioned that you opened it yesterday. So could you please tell us a little bit about this specific project and how and why you are working with the gender equality issue in your activities?
Okay, the question why I am working with gender issues is, very simple to answer. I am a woman, and I have this more than 40 years being a woman, and this is like one of my the biggest topic in my private life as well. The tool that I am trying to connect with the people is art. And I have been working on this festival mostly with Ukrainian artists and also since last year with Russian artists. And we all are East countries. And you have this patriarchy system that is still doing well, unfortunately. And if I have this platform as art, I can connect with artists from the other countries, and East is now the direction I am looking to, as I think we have quite much in common. When you look at this political sphere in our countries, you can see mostly men. Still, the female do not have such a loud voice, and I've heard a little bit of the conversation before. You were asking about this gender agenda, and I like to speak about a little bit wider conception of it, because first women, but also we must be taking care about LGBTQ society, and you must also know the situation in Poland we have now. We have really strongly right-wing party that influences our life in every point. Like, for example, we have very strict anti-abortion law since last year. And we have all this homophobic and transphobic atmosphere in the country, like public television, public media are really homophobic and transphobic. So that's what we can do in art. We can speak loudly about it. We can give voices. It's very much about giving voices to the people, to the artists who are women and who are not binary and who are not heterosexuals. And for example, last year, I must say that we co-work with Ukrainian Institute since last year. And for example, last year we prepared the project with Dmitro Levitsky and Piotr Armianowski. It's from Pik Pik Collective from Kiev. And these are two guys that were invited to the project, but when they came to Poland, they look around and they said, okay, the women in this country have really difficult situation. This was exactly the moment when this anti-abortion law was, when the government put this anti-abortion law. And they said, okay, we are men, artists coming to Poland, but that what we want is to give the voice to the women, to the women who are in bad situation. For example, in this project, which was artistical performative work for the center, and it was based on the stories of the female. There was one female who had this experience with home abusement. Many years of the experience. At the moment, she is not living at her home, but the person who is violent to her is still free. And for example, he's afraid of herself every day. So she was the hero of this artistic theatrical project. The second one was queer femme, non-binary person who feels a woman, but biologically she was born a man. So, by the way, she's half Ukrainian because her father was from Ukraine, and it was just coincidence we invited her. The other woman was Belarusian woman who has no permission for work to Poland. She's artist, and nobody knows why. It looks like she's going from one office to the second one, and everybody is saying, yes, it will be next week, you must go there, and so on and so on. So it's giving about the voices. And for example, this year we invited Ukrainian artist Rosa Sarkisian. This year, it's very important, this year in the festival, except of Sashko Brama from Ukraine, we have only like 30 artists who are only women or not binary persons. So, for example, this year, Rosa Sarkisian with artists from Poznań and Poland, Joanna Wichowska, Dominika Mądry, and Kijusza Łankiewicz, who is also a non-binary artist from Poznań. They created the project, the theatrical installation, and a lot of performances that will be presented almost every day during the festival in the front of this, public national Teatr Polski in Poznań. And this is kind of a queer project, showing the world, which is, very rainbow, which is not this straight. And also the main focus is that LGBTQ plus people creates our cultural sphere. So we should work together. And public theater should be open for these people. Also in this way, they put to the public theaters their culture, their queer culture, because it's queer culture, because it's important that queer is also a culture. These are people and it's a culture. And to show you also the context, I must say there was some time ago one of the main politicians in our country said that LGBT are not people, they are ideology. So we have really this space so strong. And I think that we should share with artists from East, from Ukraine, from Belarus, that experience of living in countries that are still very patriarchal, right? We are the same. Diplomacy can do very much about it. And for example, when we planned this queer LGBTQ plus project, for example, our Ministry of Culture would, at the moment, never subsidize that. Never. Because its expression is absolutely homophobic. And, it was such a nice surprise that I can talk with people with Ukrainian Institute, and they were so supportive. They said, okay, that's great. It makes people less violent. More free. And for example, we have also on the festival a lot of feministic projects, like the other female artist from Ukraine, Victoria Mironiuk, and artists from Ukraine, but living now in Poznań, Olga Skliarska and the actress of our theater, they make the project which is very, very feministic, because it's the project that invite the audience to speak about empathy, about care, about, this, we call it the revolution of care, revolution of empathy. Yeah, it is very important.
Thank you, Agata, for such a deep dive into your project and what you are doing. And I would like to remind that if you have any questions for our speakers, for our guests, please feel free to raise your hand and ask it. And also, if you are watching us online, you can put your question in the comments section under the online stream. And one more question that I have, actually, Iryna got me this question to my mind, mentioning the Generation Z, and a lot of conversations are now taking place about how this generation is different from the millennials, for example. I am the part of millennials generation, but how do you think? Is there any specific difference in the attitude to gender equality topics in Generation Z? Are they more involved into artistic activities and cultural activities, talking about this issue as well? Or maybe there is no difference and they are just the same as we are?
Thank you for this question. I was listening to Agata's experience, and I was thinking about the Ukrainian context. Hopefully, and we have a very great anti-discrimination legislation. So it is the attitude which is important. We have great laws, but it is important to have careful enough people, like police who care and who can arrive in the case of domestic violence, for example, or different state and private institutions who care enough to create interesting artistic projects, for example, dealing with LGBT issues or other gender issues, or creating the space for exchange between our Poland and Ukrainian colleagues, for example. And I think it is a part of an answer about Generation Z. I hope they will have another attitude, but I think that it can depend on the actual Ukrainian context. For example, unfortunately, we see some cases of aggression or threats against different Ukrainian cultural projects. For example, I was mentioning Larisa Denisenko, my colleague and my close friend, and I remember a discussion about her book Maya та її мами, and different groups of right radicals in Lviv threatening her to make the acts of aggression against this book and during the presentation of this book in the framework of a book forum in Lviv. So I think if our institutions and legislation will be strong enough to stop all this aggression against gender issues and LGBT issues, our Z generation will be safe enough to develop their more positive attitude and their attitude against stereotypes.
Agata, and how about you? Do you engage youth and Generation Z specifically in your projects? Do you see any difference in their attitude and their level of interest in what you are doing and your other colleagues are doing?
This is very interesting, because yesterday we just have started the festival, and we started it from a manifest that was prepared by the people from this LGBTQ plus society. And these people are like 20 plus years old. And I think that people from my generation can learn a lot from them. For example, this manifest that was read in Polish and Ukrainian and Belarusian language was saying, you can never hug person if she doesn't let you. Yes means yes, no means no. If you want to touch somebody, first you should ask. And it was very interesting, because they are, some of them, of course, these people who are more like activists, but they are much aware, I think, that my generation is. So it is because we are sometimes very colonial, not only in this gender issue, but age issue. We think that we know more than people 20 plus, but sometimes we can learn from these activists. For example, how to treat some body, I mean body, yeah? Ask if you can hug me. Ask how you should call me. I am she or I am him. They also were asking that. Don't think this person is she or he. If you have doubts, you can just ask. Don't misgender. That I was born as a man, it doesn't mean I am a man. So this was extremely interesting. This manifest is still on the video projection in our installation. This project made by Ukrainian Polish artists, yeah, all female and non-binary artists. This manifest is still in the front of the theater. So yes, I can see the difference, and I think I can learn from these young people as well.
Thank you, Agata. And unfortunately, we are already a little bit out of our time, but I would like to say a few words to make some conclusion of our discussion. First of all, thank you for all your inputs and sharing very interesting and specific examples of people, of women, of artists who contribute to the gender equality issues both in Ukraine and in Poland and in other countries. And I would like to quote Nick Kal, who was making our first opening keynote speech. He had one point at his slide saying that these global issues like gender equality, they are too big to be resolved by someone alone. So we need really cooperation around these issues and around these topics. And I think gender equality, which is actually about human rights, basic human rights, these are kind of topics where we need this collaboration, and where I hope art and culture and international cultural cooperation can be helpful, because I also liked what Agata said about the empathy. Probably culture and art is the most powerful tool for building empathy towards something or someone. So I really hope that we'll have some more greater success on this in this process, and thank you for sharing and joining. And I invite everyone to continue our conversation about the human rights, but after that we will have discussion about human rights in conflicts, and we will continue at 16:05. So we will have a short break now. And thank you again to Iryna, thank you Agata, and thank you all the participants and all the viewers who have been with us.